Thanks for coming back to the channel. Today we're going into detail on another Final Fantasy commander, Tifa Lockhart. She's a landfall commander with trample that doubles her power anytime a land enters the battlefield. She may be better than 99 for a lot of commander decks, but I figure with a lot of people getting into commander with the new Final Fantasy set coming around, may as well go into detail of how you could run landfall, the basics of it, and the more detailed sides of it of cards that will run in the deck. So, the basic premise of Landfall is that you want to play as many lands as possible per turn, your turn, anyone else's turn. Basically, anytime you have something that says the ability Landfall, you want to make sure that ability can happen so that you can make sure that, you get benefits off of it. But into the details of what cards that you want to run in the deck, we'll be going into artifacts, enchantments, instants, lands, planeswalkers, sorceries, and artifacts in that order. But yeah, let's get into it. So, in order to make sure those abilities happen more than once, we have Ancient Green Warden. We also have quite a few cards in this deck that have the play lands from your graveyard ability, because there's a lot of lands that you have sacrificing themselves in order to get more lands, such as Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Experience, and some others in here. This way, you can get them back from the graveyard when you don't necessarily have them in your hand, and you still have lands to play in order to get those landfall abilities. Ashaya Soul of the Wind is another premise that a lot of cards follow in the deck where their power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control, and other creatures you control become forests, making it so that we don't just rely on the lands on the battlefield, but also our creatures that are in our hand. Avenger of Zendikar, he has an ability that makes plans based upon the amount of lands that you have on the battlefield already, and gets more powerful the more lands that you have coming onto the battlefield. Azusa Lost But Seeking, once again, we want to play more than one land every turn, so we're going to use her ability to play 2 additional lands per turn. If you use her ability in conjunction with Ancient Green Warden, that does allow you to play land, sacrifice it, get it back from the graveyard, play it again, and basically get 3 lands out of your deck, which will also help thin out your deck a bit of the lands. Baru Fist of Krosa, whenever Oris comes into play, green creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. Sometimes this way, since her power is going to be doubling, it doesn't necessarily double based upon like her base toughness, power and toughness. It'll double based on like what her current power and toughness is. So if you get those counters on, that +1/+1 onto her, it'll make her stronger from the start, because doubling 2 is better than doubling 1. Braulio's Ferris Bandit, same thing with Ashaya, where he gets that power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control, and also helps you get some more lands onto the battlefield. A little bit of draw power while we're at it as well. Bristly Bill's Blind Tower has a landfall ability, giving +1/+1 counters to creatures. Similar to Baru, wanting to give her additional power, but this time it's +1/+1 counters, which +1/+1 counters stick around, whereas Baru's ability doesn't. His ability does also give creatures trample, which does help out with cards like Ashaya and Braulio's, since they don't have trample, but they are really strong creatures, so they'll be able to smack someone in the face a little bit with your creatures. Cultivator Colossus, once again, that same ability of power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. Whenever this creature enters, you may put a land from your hand onto the battlefield, draw a card, and basically same thing with Braulio's, draw power, extra lands from the hand. Floral Evoker, whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. You unfortunately can't put it onto Tifa, but it does help out where this creature is getting stronger itself. Discard a creature card, return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. That could help out a bit, getting that additional land drop every turn. And that doesn't necessarily need to be during your turn. This way, if you have that creature card in your hand, you could potentially use Tifa as a blocker in order to double her power for that. Greensleeve's Marrow Sorcerer, power and toughness, once again, equal to the number of lands you control. Whenever a land enters, you get a Dredri Badger creature token. That's another thing that a lot of these landfall abilities do, is they give you tokens. So we have quite a few things that'll do that same thing, just different types of tokens. Where were we? Loot Exuberant Explorer gets you that additional land every turn, gets you a spell from the top 6 cards of your deck that costs less to cast than the number of lands you control. Lewis Cobra gets you additional mana every time a land comes onto the battlefield. Really helpful there, because especially when some of our lands are entering tapped, that helps that out there. One card I think I forgot to include in here is Spelunking, which will help your lands enter untapped, which will allow them to tap for mana the turn you get them. Lumber, Bell of the Woods, one of my favorite landfall commanders, gets all your lands back from your graveyard. This way you don't necessarily need to rely on Greensleeve's Warden. And sometimes if you have all your landfall abilities on the battlefield and you sacrifice them all with Zerrin Orb, you could have potentially like all 40 of your lands in your graveyard. Mossborn Hydra, similar to Tifa, where it doubles its power every time a land enters the battlefield, but it doubles the number of +1/+1 counters on it instead, so it does stick around. So it's a little bit better. Nisa, Resurgent Animus, Landfall. Land enters battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color, similar to Lotus Cobra. It's the second time this ability happens this turn. Reveal cards on the top of your deck until you reveal an elf or elemental. So we don't necessarily have that many, but enough where it would be helpful to get them into our hand, like Ashaya or Avengers Zendikar, which could be like potential game enders at a certain point of the game. Where were we? Nisa, World Soul Speaker. Get energy counters anytime a land enters the battlefield. Once we have 8 of those, which for new people, you just kind of keep track of it on the side. They're something that they can't remove. So thankfully you get to like keep those, and then you get to use them in order to get a free spell out of your hand, essentially. Oracle of Moldiah, additional land every turn, similar to Azusa. Play with the top card of your library revealed, so you can give your opponent a little bit of information, but you do get to play the lands off the top of your deck, which does help out a bit, so that you're not drawing into them when you don't want to be. Rampaging Paylots, once again, tokens, trample, real fun there. Ram Moonap, Excavator, play lands from your graveyard. Sakura Tribe Elder, get a free land out of your deck. Because that's the other way we do get a lot of lands. It's just cards that say put land from your deck onto the battlefield. Scoot Swarm, some people consider it one of the worst cards in the game, but it is a lot of fun, especially in Landfall, when you're using cards like, where was it? Lemura. Cards that'll get you like 3 lands per turn, and then all of a sudden you just have 8 of the same creature. Or if you use cards like Lemura and you get those 40 lands back from your graveyard after sacrificing them all with Zerrin Orb, you have 2 to the 40th power Scoot Swarms onto the battlefield. Cyclone Cub, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Once again, helps us power up Tifa so that we could get that additional power. And also double the number of +1/+1 counters on that creature if this is the second time this happens. So that could end up coming in handy, as it basically gives it the Mossborn Hydra effect. 6. We're going to have a lot of lands in our hand in this deck at a certain point, so we could get those lands from our hand into the graveyard. This way we could then just play them from the graveyard and cast a spell that we wanted that's in our graveyard back onto the battlefield. Sultina, Speaker of Tajuru. Tax, you may return lands you control to owner's hand. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Once again, powering up Tifa. Tireless Provisioner, getting us treasure tokens, similar to Lotus Cobra, a bunch of additional mana that we'll need. You could also use food tokens if you're really at a point where you need some life. Tireless Tracker, get those clue tokens for that draw power. Titania, Nature's Force, get those tokens anytime a forest enters, which most of our lands will be forest, not all of them, so it doesn't like necessarily work with Evolving Wilds entering. Titania, Protector of Argot, whenever she enters, return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield. It doesn't necessarily play land from the graveyard, so you don't get like over and over again, but that one time does help out. And whenever a land, such as Evolving Wilds, you sacrifice it, you get a free 5/3 elemental. Wayward Swordtooth, playing additional land every turn is the main effect that you're going for here. And Eudora, Grove Gardener, whenever another non-token creature dies, return to the battlefield face down as a forest. This way we have more forest than the forest that we have in here already, because we like forests. We have, for enchantments, Druid class, gain you a little bit of life anytime you play a land, but also play an additional land every turn. Exploration, additional land every turn. Garruk's Uprising, whenever a creature control power 4 or greater enters, which a lot of times will be those tokens that we get, so that does help out there. It also allows you, so it gives you that draw power, and also helps you with giving your creatures trample for, once again, those ones that have the super powerful power and toughness, but can't necessarily do damage. Retreat to as into +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Once again, getting Tifa at a better start than where she normally starts. Zendikar's role: whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 green elemental token. Actually, let's do the enchantments now. Zern Orb, sacrifice a land, gain 2 life. This way we get a whole bunch of lands into our graveyard, since we can play them out of graveyard anyway. Meanwhile, getting that little bit of life, and really helps out, especially if you get Lumber onto the battlefield. Seer Sundial, whenever a land enters, you can pay 2, draw a card. You're at a certain point where you have too many lands, I'd say. So you could use that mana to draw some cards. Urd Heirloom, give our creatures trample, and also just a little bit of extra mana fixing. And also a little bit of draw power. And Conduit of Worlds in order to play lands from the graveyard. Then for our instance, we have Archdruid's Charm. Search the library for a creature or land card, reveal it, put it onto the battlefield tapped. If it's land, otherwise put it into your hand so you get a free search of a creature, essentially. Beast Within for removal, Interest Restoration, and Harrow. They sacrifice lands in order to put additional lands onto the battlefield. So that does really help out there, especially with the instant ability, in order to make sure that you could surprise them with doubling Tifa's power and toughness. And his restoration does 3 lands potentially, so that could really get you from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 when you were initially only at a 1. Heroic Intervention for a little bit of protection, Nature's Charm for a little bit of removal, Return of the Wild Speaker for that draw power, Return to Nature for that removal, and then Rolling Regrowth, same thing as Harrow and Interest Restoration. Let's slide over. And then we'll go into lands last. Planeswalkers, we have Nissa, Vastwood Seer. This is a side that we already saw, but then the side that we haven't seen yet is Nissa Sage Animus. Real cards from the top of your land library. If it's a land, put it onto the battlefield, otherwise put it into your hand, so a little bit of draw power there. And then her -7 is the ultimate ability, untap up to 6 target lands. Lands, they become 6/6 elemental creature tokens. They're still lands, but, sometimes, like I said, you get to a certain point where you have 40 lands on the battlefield. Not necessarily 40, but sometimes 40 if it's the Yavimaya guy. I forgot his name. Nissa, who shakes the world, double the amount of mana that your forests are going to be creating. This way you could have one really huge turn at a certain point. Most of our sorceries are getting lands out of the battlefield, like Tree Visits, Skyshroud Claim, Rishkar's Expertise is draw power, Rampant Growth, Nature's Rhythm's a search for any creature that you want, Nature's Lore, Condominus Reach, Explore for additional land out of hand. Most of the other ones are out of the deck. Cultivate, and Awaken the Woods in order to get forest creature tokens. So those do count as for your landfall abilities. And then normally I don't go into lands, but I feel with this deck is pretty important because, it's Mono Green. Why don't you just run 40 forests? Because no, this one, you don't necessarily need to run the fetch lands like Wood Foothills, Windswept Heath, Verdant Catacombs. They do still work in this deck because they are considered to be colorless I don't think colorless spells, but colorless something. So you are still allowed to run them in the deck in order to sacrifice them, in order to get your forest, in order to get that additional landfall ability. But a lot of cards that we were talking about was Evolving Wilds, where it has the ability to sacrifice this land, search your library for a basic land, aka a forest, in order to, get 2 landfall abilities a turn. That's the same thing that these things are doing, just, $19 versus 35 cents. But other cards we do that same thing are Blighted Woodlands, Broker's Hideout, Cabaret Courtyard, Escape Tunnel, Evolving Wilds, Fabled Passage, Misty Rainforest, Myriad Landscape, Ogier, Castellan Deepest Growth, who transforms into Temple Cultivation, Prismatic Vista, Riveteer's Outlook, Terramorphic Expanse, Urza's Cave, Verdant Catacombs, Windswept Heaths, and Wood Foothills. But yeah, that's the basic overview of how you can run Landfall. If you have any questions about how you'd run a deck or how I run a deck, make sure you leave it down there in the comment section. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you stay tuned for the next one. Thanks for watching.